Look up at the moon tonight. In your world, it's empty, silent, untouched except for a few flags and abandoned equipment from expeditions half a century old. But there is another world, a world where humanity never stopped climbing. In that world, the moon isn't a destination, it's a suburb. 12 permanent settlements, population 45,000. Industries, helium-3 mining, spacecraft manufacturing, astronomical research, and tourism. The children born there, the first generation of lunars, have never seen Earth except through telescope and screen. Mars isn't a dream. It's a frontier being terraformed in real time, its thin atmosphere gradually thickening from decades of greenhouse gas bombardment and biological engineering. And the asteroid belt? It's not empty space. It's the Yukon of the 21st century, a gold rush of precious metals, water ice, and rare earth elements. Mining stations cling to tumbling rocks. Prospectors and spacecraft search for the next big claim. Fortunes are won and lost in the outer solar system. This world wasn't built by magic or impossible technology. Every spacecraft, every habitat, every innovation in this timeline could have been built with technology that existed in 1975. The physics didn't change. The engineering was always possible. What changed was a single decision. In our world, America and the Soviet Union reached the moon and stopped. The competition that drove them ended. Budgets were cut, ambitions were scaled back. Humanity looked away from the stars and turned inward. In this world, they never stopped competing. And competition, that most human of drives, carried us to worlds we've only dreamed of. This is the story of what happens when humanity doesn't give up. When the space race doesn't end with Apollo 17 in 1972, but continues through the Cold War, past the Soviet collapse, into the 21st century. When two superpowers, and eventually more, pour unlimited resources into the ultimate competition. Who will control the solar system? It's a story of triumph, and it's a story of cost.
The space race began not with dreams of exploration, but with fear. When the Soviet Union launched Sputnik in 1957, America didn't see a scientific achievement. They saw a weapon. If the Soviets could put a satellite in orbit, they could drop a nuclear warhead on any American city. The space race was always about military supremacy, wrapped in the language of exploration. What followed was the most concentrated period of technological advancement in human history. In 12 years, from Sputnik in 1957 to Apollo 11 in 1969, humanity went from barely reaching orbit to landing on another world. The United States spent over $280 billion in today's dollars. The Soviet Union spent similar amounts. Both nations mobilized hundreds of thousands of engineers, scientists, and workers. It was possible because both sides believed losing meant existential defeat. Or at least that's how it felt. 6 successful Apollo moon landings between 1969 and 1972. The Soviets never managed a crewed lunar landing. The competition seemed settled. What happened next was predictable. The winner lost interest. NASA's budget was slashed. Grand plans for permanent moon bases, Mars expeditions, and space stations were canceled or scaled down dramatically. Apollo 18, 19, and 20, already planned, hardware already built, were scrapped. The Saturn V production line was closed. By 1975, America was launching a single space station, Skylab, using leftover Apollo hardware. The shuttle program was designed not for exploration, but for economical Earth orbit operations. The Soviet Union, having lost the race, also scaled back. Their lunar program was quietly canceled. They focused on space stations, Salyut, then Mir, proving humans could survive extended periods in orbit, but going nowhere new. In 1975, the space race officially ended with détente. Apollo-Soyuz, a joint mission, a handshake in orbit. The message was clear. Space was no longer a battlefield. It was a place for peaceful cooperation, limited budgets, and modest ambitions. For the next 5 decades, human spaceflight stagnated. The International Space Station, humanity's greatest orbital achievement, orbits at 400 kilometers, barely above Earth's atmosphere. In 50 years since the last moon landing, no human has ventured beyond low Earth orbit. We proved we could reach the moon. Then we stopped going. Not because it became impossible, not because we learned everything there was to learn, but because the political will, the competition that drove funding, disappeared. In our world, space exploration became the domain of international cooperation and eventually private enterprise. Slower, more economical, more sustainable perhaps. but infinitely less ambitious. We built the tools to colonize the solar system and put them in museums. The question that haunts space enthusiasts is, what if we hadn't? What if the competition that got us to the moon in 12 years had continued? What if the Cold War space race had never ended, but escalated? What if the budget hadn't been cut?
In our timeline, this meeting decided the future of American spaceflight. NASA presented Nixon with ambitious plans: a permanent moon base by 1978, a crew the Mars mission by 1981, a large modular space station, and a reusable space shuttle. The cost? Maintaining Apollo-era budgets, about 4% of federal spending. Nixon looked at the price tag, considered the political landscape, and chose the cheapest option: the shuttle alone. Everything else was canceled. But in this timeline, something changed his calculation. 2 weeks before this meeting, Soviet Premier Leonid Brezhnev gave a speech that Western intelligence intercepted and translated. In it, he outlined Soviet plans not just to reach the moon, but to establish permanent socialist colonies throughout the solar system, demonstrating the superiority of the Soviet system in the cosmos. It was propaganda, but Nixon didn't know that. The Soviets were in reality years behind America and hemorrhaging money trying to catch up. But Nixon, paranoid, competitive, obsessed with foreign policy, saw a threat. My fellow Americans, we stand at a crossroads. We have won the race to the moon. But the question now is, will we claim it? The Soviet Union has announced plans for permanent lunar occupation. We cannot, we will not, allow the moon to become a communist outpost. America will maintain its presence in space. We will establish the first permanent human settlement on another world, and we will do it within this decade. The decision wasn't about science or exploration. It was about denying territory to the Soviets. Congress, still in the Cold War mindset, approved the funding. Not Apollo-era levels, Nixon wasn't that committed, but enough. NASA's budget was set at 2.5% of federal spending, with provisions for lunar base construction. The Apollo Applications Program, previously scaled back to just Skylab, was fully funded. Apollo 18 through 25 were approved for lunar base construction missions. But the Americans had miscalculated in one critical way. When news of Nixon's announcement reached the Soviet Union, Brezhnev faced a choice: admit the propaganda was empty and look weak, or double down and actually build the lunar program they'd promised. He doubled down. The Soviet lunar program, which had suffered repeated failures and was on the verge of cancellation, received emergency funding and a direct order: reach the moon before the Americans established their base. The space race hadn't ended in 1969. It had only just begun. What followed was a competition not to visit the moon, but to own it. The American lunar base strategy was methodical. Land cargo missions first, habitat modules, power systems, life support. Then rotate crews every 6 months. By December 1974, Tranquility Base had 4 interconnected habitat modules, a nuclear reactor for power, and a permanent crew of 6 astronauts conducting science and testing long-duration spaceflight techniques. The Soviets arrived a year later, but they arrived. Their approach was different: a single, larger station called Lunabase, designed to house 12 cosmonauts. It was less sophisticated than the American facility, but more ambitious in scale. By 1976, both superpowers had permanent staffed outposts on the moon, separated by 1,200 kilometers of lunar regolith. The lunar space race created something unprecedented: 2 hostile nations with permanent populations on the same extraterrestrial body, with no international law governing territorial claims or conduct. It was only a matter of time before tensions escalated. The Luna crisis of 1977 nearly sparked an international incident. The confrontation lasted 4 hours. Both crews had orders not to yield. Communication between Earth and the Moon, with its several-second delay, made real-time diplomatic resolution impossible. In the end, both crews returned to their bases without violence. But the message was clear: the Moon was becoming contested territory. The Outer Space Treaty of 1967 had declared that no nation could claim sovereignty over celestial bodies. But it said nothing about exclusive economic zones, resource extraction rights, or what happens when 2 nations both claim to be using the same area. The Treaty of Selene, signed in 1978, created the first interplanetary governance framework, designated zones for each nation, shared scientific areas, and protocols for resource claims. It wasn't perfect, but it prevented war. The continuation of the space race had another effect. Other nations couldn't stay out. Europe, pooling resources through the ESA, announced plans for their own lunar outpost by 1985. China, emerging from the Cultural Revolution, declared space a national priority. India, Japan, everyone wanted a piece of the moon. The solar system was becoming humanity's next frontier. And frontiers are always messy.
Alternate timeline. The Lunar Economy, 1980 to 1990. Bootstrapping civilization. By 1980, the moon wasn't just a scientific outpost, it was becoming self-sufficient. The key breakthrough was lunar resource utilization. Both American and Soviet bases discovered that nearly everything needed for survival existed on the moon. Water ice in polar craters, oxygen extracted from lunar regolith, metals refined from lunar soil, and helium-3, a rare isotope perfect for theoretical fusion reactors. The economics were compelling. Launching material from Earth cost $10,000 per kilogram. Manufacturing it on the moon, once infrastructure existed, cost a fraction of that. This created a feedback loop. Lunar resources enabled larger lunar facilities, which enabled more sophisticated manufacturing, which enabled even larger facilities. By 1985, the moon was exporting refined metals and propellant to Earth orbit, where both nations were building modular space stations for scientific research and, increasingly, for military surveillance. In 1984, a child was born at Tranquility Base to two scientist astronauts on extended rotation. The first human born off Earth. Within 2 years, there were 5 lunar children. This changed everything, psychologically. The moon wasn't just an outpost anymore. It was a place where humanity lived, worked, raised families. The political implications were profound. Were these children American? Lunar? Something new.
The Mars Race 1988 to 1998, the next horizon. By the late 1980s, the moon was old news. The frontier had shifted. Both superpowers, along with ESA and a resurgent China, announced plans for crewed Mars missions. The timeline, first landing by 1995. The strategy was different from Apollo. These weren't flags and footprint missions, they were colonization expeditions. Each Mars mission carried a crew of 12 and enough equipment to establish a permanent base. The spacecraft, nuclear-powered, using lunar-manufactured propellant, were built in orbit using resources from both Earth and Moon. America reached Mars first. Commander Sarah Chen's first words, "Mars Base Alpha established. Humanity is now a 2-planet species." The Soviets arrived second, but with a larger crew and more ambitious construction plans. By 1998, Mars hosted 3 permanent bases, American, Soviet, and a joint ESA-Japanese facility. Total population, 85 people. The challenges were immense. Mars has an atmosphere, but it's 1% as thick as Earth's. The temperature averages minus 60 degrees Celsius. Dust storms can last months. Communication with Earth has a 20-minute delay. But humans adapted. They always do.
The Soviet collapse that wasn't, 1989 to 1995. Space saves the Union. Here's where this timeline diverges dramatically from ours. In our world, the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, ending the Cold War. Economic stagnation, political reform movements, and nationalist uprisings brought down the communist system. In this timeline, something different happened. The Soviet space program, far from being a drain on the economy, had become a source of national pride and, increasingly, economic value. Helium-3 from the moon, rare earth metals from lunar mining, space-based solar power platforms designed in Soviet orbital facilities. These weren't theoretical benefits, they were real industries. The Soviet Union in this timeline possessed something it lacked in ours, a successful frontier expansion that demonstrated the system could achieve great things. Did this prevent collapse?
Not entirely. The Soviet Union still underwent reforms, the Eastern European satellites still gained independence, but the core USSR, Russia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and the Central Asian republics held together, united partly by shared investment in the space infrastructure. The economic benefits weren't evenly distributed and resentment still festered, but the collapse was partial, not total. By 1995, the Soviet Union had transformed into the Confederation of Soviet States, a looser federation, partially market-based, but still centrally controlled and still competing with America for dominance in space. The Cold War didn't end, it moved. Instead of competing over Europe and proxy wars in the Third World, the superpowers now competed over Mars, the asteroid belt, and the moons of Jupiter.
The asteroid rush 2000 to 2015 manifest destiny in zero-G. The early 2000s saw the privatization of the solar system. Governments had established the infrastructure, lunar bases, Mars colonies, orbital stations. But the asteroid belt was too vast for government monopoly. Private companies, licensed by various nations, began launching prospecting missions. The economics were staggering. A single metallic asteroid could contain trillions of dollars worth of platinum, gold, and rare earth elements. By 2010, over 200 crude mining stations operated throughout the inner solar system. The population of space, combining the Moon, Mars, orbital habitats, and asteroid stations, exceeded 100,000. Earth's economy was being fundamentally reshaped. Rare materials that once cost thousands per gram could be harvested from asteroids and shipped to Earth or processed in orbital facilities. Environmental regulations on Earth became stricter because heavy industry could move to space. But this new economy created new inequalities. Who owned the asteroids? Who controlled space resources? The Treaty of Selene governed the Moon, but nothing comprehensive existed for the rest of the solar system. The Lunars and Martians, now numbering over 60,000, began demanding political representation. They paid taxes to Earth nations, but had no vote. They followed Earth laws, but had no say in making them. Sound familiar?
The Outer System, 2015 to 2025. Exponential expansion. The 2010s and 2020s saw humanity push even further. Nuclear and eventually fusion propulsion, developed through decades of space-based research, made the outer solar system accessible. Missions to Jupiter, Saturn, and beyond became routine. By 2020, research stations operated on Europa, Titan, and Enceladus, moons with subsurface oceans and the potential for extraterrestrial life. The discovery of microbial life on Europa in 2023 changed everything. Humanity wasn't alone. Life existed elsewhere. It was primitive, simple bacteria-like organisms, but it was life. The philosophical and religious implications rippled through human civilization.
Earth in 2025, the world that stayed ambitious. By 2025, Earth in this timeline is radically different from ours. The space economy represents 15% of global GDP. Resource scarcity, the driving force behind so many Earth conflicts, has been largely eliminated by space mining. Platinum, rare earths, water, and even food come increasingly from off-world. Climate change, while still a concern, is being actively managed. Space-based solar power provides clean energy. Heavy industry has moved to orbit. Earth is becoming a garden, residential and service-based, while manufacturing happens in space. Human society has expanded across millions of kilometers. The population of space has reached 250,000. 3 generations have now been born off Earth. But this expansion came at a cost.
The inequality is stark. Those who could afford passage to space, the educated, the wealthy, the skilled, left Earth. Those who couldn't stayed behind. A brain drain of historic proportions depopulated many Earth regions of their best and brightest. Earth, in this timeline, is poorer, more unequal, and more politically fragmented than our world. The Moon and Mars have meanwhile become meritocratic technocracies, highly educated, wealthy, and increasingly separate from Earth culturally and politically. In 2024, the Moon declared independence. Not violently, not through war, but through democratic referendum among lunar citizens. 78% voted for autonomy. The United States could have responded militarily, but the optics of Earth soldiers attacking Moon civilians broadcast across the solar system made that impossible. Luna became the first sovereign state not on Earth. Mars is expected to follow within 2 years. By 2025, humanity is fragmenting politically, even as it expands spatially. The Solar Parliament, established in 2023, attempts to govern interplanetary affairs, but tensions are constant. Earth nations resent the lunar and Martian delegates who consume Earth resources but don't follow Earth laws. Off-world communities resent Earth's attempt to control their affairs. Is humanity becoming a unified spacefaring civilization, or is it simply creating more territories to fight over? The fourth generation is coming of age having never known Earth. What are they? Still human? Something new? Their bodies have adapted to low gravity, taller, frailer in Earth gravity, stronger in their native environments. Their cultures are distinct. Their loyalties are to their worlds, not Earth. Humanity is speciating, not biologically, not yet, but culturally and politically.
Reflection. Closing thought. Which world is better? In our timeline, we chose caution. We chose social programs over space stations. We chose to solve Earth's problems before leaving for the stars. Space exploration became slow, methodical, international, cooperative. We've saved money, saved lives, invested in making Earth a better place, though whether we've succeeded is debatable. But we've also stayed home. In this timeline, they chose ambition. They chose competition over cooperation. They poured resources into the sky that might have fed the hungry and housed the homeless. They lost more lives, created more inequality, fragmented humanity across millions of kilometers. But they also became something greater than a single planet could contain. There's a question that every generation must answer. Are we explorers or settlers? In our world, we're settlers. We've chosen to make the best of the one world we have, to perfect it before moving on. It's noble, it's cautious, it's safe. In their world, they're explorers. They've chosen to expand before perfecting, to risk before ensuring, to leap before looking. It's reckless, it's expensive, it's dangerous, but it's also magnificent. Perhaps the real question isn't which choice was right. Perhaps it's whether any species that stops exploring eventually stops existing. Evolution favors expansion. The species that stay in one place, no matter how perfect that place is, eventually face extinction when that place changes, and all places change. In our world, we're a single-planet species. If Earth fails, through climate change, asteroid impact, nuclear war, or any of 100 possible catastrophes, humanity ends. In their world, humanity is distributed, resilient. If Earth fails, humanity continues on the Moon, Mars, Europa, Titan, and 100 smaller outposts. They've traded unity for survival. We've traded survival for comfort. The space race in our world ended because we won, and winners stopped competing. In their world, it never ended because they understood something we forgot. The race isn't against each other. It's against entropy, against time, against the fundamental nature of a universe that doesn't care whether humanity survives. We look at their world and see waste. They look at ours and see stagnation. Both are right. Both are wrong. History will judge not which choice was better, but whether either choice mattered at all in the cosmic scale. But for now, in this moment, there are two versions of humanity, one that looked up and said, someday, and one that said, today. We choose to go to the moon, not because it is easy, but because it is hard. JFK, 1962. We choose to stay on Earth, not because it is easy, but because it is necessary. Anonymous, 2025. One world stayed home to perfect itself.
One world left home to become something more. Neither finished their journey. Perhaps that's the point.